Welcome, everyone. We'll get started shortly. We'll just allow for another minute or two for the remaining folks to join. So just hold tight for another minute or two. To anyone just joining, we'll get started in just under a minute here. Just want to make sure that anyone who's still signing in can catch the beginning. So we'll get started in just a moment. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Brady Nemeth, and I'm the program manager for all of DLC's program compliance efforts. We have a relatively brief agenda here, as we just wanted to try and quickly cover the basics and answer any questions that you might have. So to that end, we'll start by running through the surveillance testing process. During that, we'll take a look at some of the paperwork and other communications that you'll be receiving. And then finally, some frequently asked questions that we've seen from previous rounds, as well as answering any new questions that you might have. If you've attended one of these in the previous round, much of the information is going to be the same, but it should still be a good refresher for you. And just to make sure my bases are covered, I did start one of these last year, and no one could hear me as I was advancing slides. So I'm sure I will get some answer or some questions in the questions pane if that happens this time. A few housekeeping items. Unlike in previous rounds, these slides will be posted to the website. While this guide is really, meant to help those currently going through the process and not for general sort of mass consumption, in an effort to provide more information to industry on surveillance testing updates, we will be posting them. They'll be found on the surveillance testing page. So to get there, you're going to go to the main website, designlights.org. Up top, there's a drop-down menu for solid-state lighting, and then from there, you're going to select surveillance testing, and then it'll be somewhere on there that should be evident. But those will be going up, hopefully right after this, if not definitely tomorrow. On the webinar side of things, all attendees are muted. All questions should be asked through the GoToWebinar question pane that is probably on the right-hand side of your screen. We won't be answering any questions that are specific to your own selection on the webinar, but we're happy to follow up afterwards. If for some reason we don't get to your question on the webinar, since we're only here for a little bit less than 30 minutes, we'll be sure to follow up individually. So I think it always helps to put some faces to names, so you can see, the members of the DLC's program teams here. While you might only be interacting with one or two people, there's actually a team behind it all who helps provide input about the program. So on the program operations side, we have myself and Christiana, who's also on the call. Your interactions with surveillance@designlights.org, that inbox will be exclusively with one of us. On the general program side of things, we have Lisa Whitney Schulte, who's the director of programs for DLC, Paul Ayers, as well as a new program manager who's actually going to be joining our team later this month. I should also note that this list isn't exhaustive. Larger issues will also be bringing in other program managers sort of on an as-needed basis. Also not shown here is our finance staff, who's responsible for managing the invoices that people receive and pay. So you might be interacting with a couple of other people as well. And, I certainly recognize that some of you may have relationships with the folks listed on the right or some other program managers here at the DLC. But if you do have an issue that you need to discuss about surveillance testing, please use the surveillance testing email address. No one else besides Christiana or myself are really involved with the selections on a day-to-day basis. So they really don't have any information about your selection, and they'll be coming to us anyways. So going to someone else is just going to prevent you from getting a timely response, and we want to help you out as quickly as possible. And so far, we've been able, even with an increase in selections this time around, we're still responding to everyone within the next business day. So first, let's take a look at the surveillance testing process. Included in everyone's notification documentation is a link to the current surveillance testing policy. So none of this really should be news to anyone, but I do want to take a minute and talk through some of it. Previously, products were only selected on a system of targeted random sampling. This basically meant that there were groups products were in a group for one of 6 reasons, and then selected randomly from within that group. In the most recent policy revision, we also have the ability to randomly select products from the QPL. That data is actually going to be extremely helpful so that we can sort of create a control group when analyzing the results of the program and making future choices about program policy. But the 6 groups from the target portion of the policy are products whose performance is close to meeting the technical requirements under which they were qualified, meaning standard or premium, products whose performance greatly exceeds the technical requirements. Third, you have products with past application issues. So that would be things like test reports with reporting issues or supplemental documentation that contained issues, product misrepresentation, that sort of thing. Fourth, we have complaints from industry, including members, but I would note that any complaints from non-members require documentation before actually being allowed to be put into a group for selection. Then the last 2 were products of manufacturers who have chosen not to participate in previous rounds, and products of manufacturers with a history of failing results. In order to keep application costs as low as possible, the surveillance testing program invoices the selected manufacturer on a per test basis to cover the cost of testing and administration. Currently, the rate for that is $350 per test, which some of you have seen already. In a majority of the cases, the products will be procured directly from the selected manufacturer. That means that all manufacturers, once notified of the selection and once they know that they'll be moving forward, to keep things really moving as quickly as possible, you should start prepping for that product to be sent out. A little bit more information will be given on that shortly. The manufacturer doesn't get to choose which lab will be testing the products. We'll be choosing the lab it gets sent to. We do have options across 3 of the 4 mainland U.S. time zones for adequate coverage. So when possible, we try and create sort of the shortest distance traveled. Products will be evaluated against 2 tolerance tables. There's a dedicated slide to that coming up, as this is always the source of quite a few questions, so we'll dive into that. And of course, the program levies consequences on those products that are found to be not in compliance. So here's just a quick look at the program's process. It should be pretty self-explanatory. The product gets selected and you get notified. If you accept, then we will invoice for the product, wait for that invoice to be paid. We'll send out procurement information. The general standard is that products will be procured within 8 weeks. If not, we'll make sure that that's any longer time beyond that's agreed upon beforehand. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Then we have the testing portion. The lab should be, from the time the product arrives, the lab should be done testing within about 2 weeks. Then it will analyze the results, send them out to you, and the appeals process when applicable. Once we do get most of the selections completed in a round, including any appeals, we'll start planning for the next round. So that's generally the high-level overview of how it works. So all of you should hopefully be familiar with the notification documents that were sent out. There are 3 pages in total, and before sending it back to us, if you're accepting, you'll need to make sure that items on all 3 pages are complete. If you received more than 1 notification because multiple products were selected, you're still required to fill out all 6 pages. So you'll notice at the top left corner in each page, there's a reference number that's unique to that product selection. The first page contains the actual notification. That's what you're looking at here on your screen. Please read through to understand the model that was selected. If there's any doubt or in the event of a QPL error, which does occur sometimes, we've also included the DLC product ID, which is a code that's unique to that line on the QPL. It also contains a number of samples required for surveillance testing. This should mirror the amount that was needed for qualification. For example, if you're talking about a 4-foot linear replacement lamp, we'll need 2 samples, and we'll be running 2 tests for one in bare lamp, one in troffer. For most selected products, meaning luminaires, complete luminaires, or retrofit kits, only a single lamp is going to be required. As noted in the letter itself, please be sure to sign on only one line, either accepting or declining. We've already seen a few instances of people going through a little bit too quickly and signing both. And of course, be sure to fill out every line on the bottom part. That's just a little bit of personal information so we know who you are and that you're authorized to sign this on behalf of your organization. Then we have page 2 here. This is just to make sure that you understand the policies as well as the timelines. This page is optional if you're declining. Just the first page is needed there at minimum. After reading through everything, take a careful look at your personal timeline to get the paperwork back. Per the policy, this is going to be 10 business days. Everyone on this webinar was notified last week, meaning that your personal due date will be sometime next week. Understand that if we don't have a completed form by that date, then the product selected as well as all associated products will be delisted according to the policy. So really just don't wait until the last minute, forget to fill out part of the form, and then miss the deadline trying to get the completed form back to us. Once again, don't forget to fill out the bottom part completely. Lastly, here we have the third page. This page only needs to be filled out for those who are accepting the selection and moving forward. First, you'll be selecting 1 or 2 primary contacts for DLC surveillance testing. We've had a handful of people jumping the gun a little bit, again, and providing people who can be contacted to procure products. That's not what this is for. The contacts listed here are people from your organization who are able to make decisions on behalf of your company as it pertains to surveillance testing anyways, and they'll be the ones who receive notifications, receive the test results, etc. After that, we have what you would like to happen to the product once testing is complete. The product will be held by the lab until the process is complete, including any appeals. After that, they'll either dispose of the product or have it shipped back to you. If it's being shipped back to you, we require both the address it's going to, but also your company's shipping account, as well as the company that you used to ship the products. By getting all of this information and charging your own internal account, we're sort of cutting out DLC as the middleman, which ultimately cuts down on costs and simplifies the invoicing process to just that initial testing and administration costs. After notification, we have invoicing and procurement. Both invoicing and procurement should look fairly similar for everyone. As I just mentioned, DLC doesn't wait in the shipping. It's just an added cost. Again, we would just be a middleman, so that's why manufacturers will be providing their information if they wish for the product to be returned at the end. Getting the product to us is also on the manufacturer, or not to us, to the lab, I should say. After the invoice has been paid, DLC will follow up within a few business days with specific procurement instructions. I know a handful of you are waiting on that now. We do get a lot of questions about this, so I'd just like to reiterate that that information is not sent out until after we've received payment of the invoice. So those procurement instructions, they'll provide all of the necessary information. That'll be things like the selected product again, the number of samples again, the reference housing that's going to be used in the case of lamps or retrofit kits. That's something new to this round, so if you've been selected in the past, we hadn't done that. That'll be new. What to include in your shipment, and obviously, perhaps most importantly, where you're going to be sending the product. At that point, we'll ask you to respond in 5 business days with an estimated date that the product will be shipped, and then to follow up once again with tracking information once it is sent. With hundreds of samples that are being sent around and lots of moving parts, that individualized tracking information is very, very helpful to the lab in identifying products as soon as they get in. So please don't forget to follow up with that. Having said all that, just a couple of other reminders. Made-to-order products can still go through surveillance testing so long as they can be procured in a reasonable amount of time. Again, if it's going to be longer than 8 weeks, we just need to make sure that we've mutually agreed on that ahead of time. DLC can procure from any source, so while it isn't our main or preferred method, we do retain the right to procure from other people if we see fit. We do get requests to change the product that's selected. This is not always, but typically because one model isn't readily available, such as a lower CCT product in a primary use that typically sees higher color temperatures. We have a very limited ability to substitute products since we have to stay within our predetermined targets. So just want to make sure that's understood. There's very limited ability for substitution. Once the product arrives at the lab, it'll take about 3 to 4 weeks for the testing to be carried out and for the results to be reviewed. I think one point of confusion for many is how the two tables work for surveillance testing, so that's what we'll walk through here. All products are reviewed against both tolerance tables. Table 1 contains nearly the same exact tolerances that get used for qualification of a product, and we'll talk about the differences in just a second here. So, for instance, if you're looking at it, let's say you have a high bay product that has a minimum requirement of 10,000 lumens per the technical requirements. That product can get qualified and stay on the QPL if it has a lumen output of 9,000 lumens or greater, meaning 10% lower than the light output requirement. The changes to the policy are in bold, namely the change in efficacy from -3% to -4%, and the rules around color temperature. We got a lot of feedback on both of these during the last policy revision. The efficacy number was changed to -4% in light of some data which demonstrates that efficacy can be objectively measured within roughly a 4% margin of error, thus making the existing 3% or -3% a little bit too tight. Regarding CCT, the color temperature has to fall within the same ANSI bin from qualification. Additionally, for products that don't fall inside of a typical bin, such as 2700, 3000, 35, etc., we will allow for a flexible binning option, which is, again, part of an ANSI standard. To determine the eligibility for that, to use that flexible binning, DLC will review the reported CCT on the QPL. So what does that all mean? I just wanted to be as clear as we can here. In the center, you see sort of the quote-unquote traditional ANSI bins. So if your product was listed on the QPL at, let's say, 3500 Kelvin, it has to test between 3220 and 3710, or perhaps, let's say it was 5000, must test then between 4746 Kelvin and 5312. The minimum and max, again, this is all defined as part of the ANSI standard. Flexible binning is allowed to be used when the reported value on the QPL falls outside of one of the nominal CCTs you see in the middle. In those cases, we'll round the reported value to the nearest 100 Kelvin and follow what the standard prescribes from there. After we've reviewed the product against Table 1, it then gets evaluated under Table 2. This table has been reduced down to just 3 metrics from previous versions, which had 8. Users of the list expect, a degree of accuracy, which incorporates things like manufacturing tolerances, so on and so forth. So what Table 2 does is it helps ensure that degree of accuracy on the QPL. Another reason for clarifying Table 1 a bit more and reducing the amount of Table 2 metrics is that we wanted to draw clearer lines for consequences. So the consequences for failing Table 1, meaning you don't meet the technical requirements, those are going to be more severe than failing Table 2, which, as you'll see in just a few minutes, has an option to remain listed on the QPL. And I mentioned it earlier, but it's important to note here that all products are reviewed against the requirements under which they were originally qualified. So if it's a premium product, it's getting reviewed under the premium or against the premium requirements. If a product fails, manufacturers have the chance to appeal. Further instructions will be provided in any notifications of a failed product, but basically a manufacturer has 5 business days to initiate an appeal once they receive those results. Initiating appeal is real simple. It's just an email stating that you intend to appeal. If you're not moving forward, we just want to know that quickly and close it out because there are lots of these to get to. After you initiate an appeal, you're going to then have 10 business days or 2 weeks to send us your full appeal. And a full appeal must include sufficient detail that addresses the reason for questioning the validity of the test results, in addition to a proposed remedy, maybe more testing, for instance. Also in the appeal should be a signed statement agreeing to pay the fees associated with the appeal. Fees are based on the administrative cost as well as any additional testing or product procurement that has to take place. This is typically, but not always, the same per test rate as the initial testing, which once again is $350. A full appeal should have some sort of technical analysis and documentation using the test reports that were used during the qualification process to demonstrate how the product is supposed to perform is not acceptable. Some other examples of appeals that won't be accepted, and all of these are noted in the policy. One, manufacturers indicating a change to someone else's process, such as a supplier, saying, oh, well, our supplier is going to be better in looking out after their binning of their chips or something like that. Bottom line here is, no passing the buck. It's your name that's on the QPL. You're the one that has to stand by your own product. Second, the wrong product was sent. Surprisingly, we saw that quite a few times in previous rounds. And lastly, providing different test data that's on the same product without providing any sort of technical justification or analysis. We've heard some comments that we haven't defined well enough what a successful appeal looks like, and that's actually intentional for 2 reasons. One is that we don't want to presume to know how your products operate better than you do. So we want your ability to defend your product to be sort of as open-ended as you see fit and not really put a lot of borders around that. Secondly, every non-compliant test result is different, so we can't know ahead of time all the different possibilities of what could have caused that to be non-compliant. And something that catches people off guard is that products are delisted once the manufacturer is notified of the non-compliance. Then and only then, if the appeal is successful and the results are overturned, the products will then return to the QPL with the original date of qualification. And lastly, all appeal results are final. They won't be reviewed again. Next is on to consequences. Just a quick reminder that this little chart is for someone receiving consequences for the first time, as you'll notice down below. A full list of consequences can be found in the policy in section F, so it lays out in far more detail there. I would very much encourage everyone to re-review that if you haven't already. I won't spend a lot of time on this other than to say that essentially in any case where someone declines participation, where the product doesn't meet the requirements, then the product, as well as any associated products, will be delisted. The policy, again, more clearly defines what constitutes an associated product in different cases. Obviously, if a product meets Table 1 and Table 2, the process ends and you're all set. New to the policy is that if you have 3 selections within 2 consecutive rounds and they're all compliant, then you basically have a cooling off or a resting period of 1 round where you can't have any product selected. This is obviously to make sure that we are not overburdening manufacturers who are demonstrating compliance with program rules. We've created a little timeline so that everyone has an idea of what to expect, but please, please, please note that this is just an estimate. Some people might fall out of these ranges for one reason or another, so please follow the dates in your specific correspondence. Because not everyone receives their notifications on the same day, means that everyone's going to have different timelines that they must go by. Some of the end dates for these tasks might be past your own deadline, so again, go by the correspondence, not what you see here. Notifications for everyone on this call, again, went out last week, and the last of you therefore have until October 19th to return your completed forms, but most of you will have until sometime before that date. Once we receive the paperwork indicating that you accept the selection, we'll send out an invoice. Those are expected to be paid within 5 business days of being sent. If that's going to be a problem, please let us know as soon as possible. That will continue, or invoices will continue for this group until mid to late November, so around the Thanksgiving holiday here in the US. Things, again, can be highly variable when it comes to procurement and testing, but we expect products to be arriving to the lab and being tested as soon as about 1 to 2 weeks from now, lasting until basically the end of December or earlier on in January. We try and have the results reviewed on our end within just a couple of days from receiving those test results back from the lab. Some early birds might be seeing those results sometime in November, but I would suspect that most people won't be seeing them until into December or January. Thanksgiving and the holiday season in general is obviously going to push things back slightly. From there, everyone has the aforementioned timeline to appeal. For everyone who accepts selection that's on this call and moves forward, we would expect things to be completed and all wrapped up by February or thereabouts. Just a little bit of perspective for you. So this round has a total of 400 selections, and those are coming from 317 unique manufacturers. That means that about 40 manufacturers or so had more than one selection this round. We want to balance our need for a high testing, a high volume of products without bogging anyone in particular down too much. So therefore, we've capped all manufacturers at no more than 2 products per round. Lastly, these products are coming from all over the QPL. I think it's just over 30 primary use designations. Lastly, I know we're running up against the last couple minutes here, but we'll go into a couple of FAQs and any live questions that people may have. While I'm running over the last couple slides here of FAQs, please use the question pane to submit any questions you have if you haven't done so already. Any questions not specifically addressed will be followed up with directly. So first, these are in no particular order, by the way. They're just some of the most common ones, and I think there's 3 slides here worth. So first is, I have placeholders in my product that was selected. Which option is being selected? Placeholders are only supposed to be in the model number because they're not affecting performance, with some limited exceptions. Of course, you could argue CCT variations does affect performance somewhat, as do voltage variations. Both of those are allowed. But for the most part, it should be things like, housing color and things like that, mounting options. Any options, therefore, qualified in the placeholder are acceptable. If you ever have any questions, please let us know ahead of time. Don't wait until after you've sent the product to then follow up and say, oh, wait, is this what you meant? I don't sell the product anymore. Can you pick another? That's one we get quite often. If the product is no longer sold or manufactured, you should return your paperwork declining the selection. At that point, we'll note that you declined because the product is no longer sold, but you need to obviously provide us that information. If the product can be procured in some manner, for instance, via maybe you're a private labeler and you can get it from the OEM, and you wish to move forward, then you can certainly do that. Where do I ship my product? A lot of people who ask this do so usually when they're returning their notification paperwork. Again, if you haven't figured out already from the presentation, we will be sending procurement instructions after the invoices have been paid. How many samples are needed? Again, this should be equivalent to how many are needed for qualification. That number is going to be both in the notification as well as in the procurement documents. What reference housing will be used for my lamp or retrofit kit? This information will be provided ahead of time, unlike previous rounds in which it was not. The manufacturer has the option of providing their own housing at their own expense, so long as it's an approved housing. Is test data or rated data used for reviewing the results? Any product that has test data on the QPL, the tables will be evaluated against those values. And for products that only have rated or reported data, meaning child products, the tables are going to be reviewed against those values. Lastly, the product is made to order. What should I do? Again, please just advise after accepting the selection. We'll work with you to procure it in that reasonable time frame. So if there's any questions, just be proactive about it and let us know as soon as you can. Why was my product selected? We get this one quite frequently as well. We can't tell you that right now while we're going through the process. I think it would be a little bit foolish on our part to be procuring the product directly from you and say something like, oh, well, we're concerned about the color temperature or something in your product. But we are happy to provide that to you after the process is completed. Then we have my premium product fails at table 1 tolerances, meaning it doesn't meet the technical requirements, but it still meets the requirements for standard. Can I stay on the QPL as standard? The answer to that is no. Failing to meet the requirements will result in the product getting delisted. You can, however, resubmit it as a standard product through the application process afterwards at the full application fee. So that's all I have for right now. I will give everyone just another minute, and I'll look through some of the questions if there are any that came in. If you have any that you either aren't comfortable sharing here or whatever, please contact surveillance@designlights.org, and we will be happy to reach back out to you. At this point, there's no more information or no more slides coming, but I'll briefly pause here for just a minute, try and review some of the questions that came in, and get you answers to that. So thank you all for attending. And if you ask a question, please feel free to stick on for just another minute or two. So we had a question here. We did get to it, but just a lot of these questions are good, and multiple people would like to know the answers. So we have one. If a linear retrofit kit is selected, do we need to submit a sample including the housing, is I think the question. No, you don't have to. Again, we will be letting you know what housing it will be tested in. If for some reason you don't want it tested in that at your own cost, you can provide that, and obviously the housing can be returned to you afterwards by the lab, again at your own cost, and that housing must be on the approved reference housing list, which can be found online. Where do we send the completed applications? Those can be sent right back to us, surveillance@designlights.org. That's pretty much who you'll be interacting with most of the time. However, we use QuickBooks for sending out the invoices, so invoices are not going to be coming from surveillance@designlights. But other than that, everything else is surveillance@designlights. Someone asked about getting a copy of the slides. If you didn't catch at the beginning, we will be posting this to the website either this afternoon or tomorrow. It'll be on the surveillance testing portion of the website. So if you go up to the top of designlights.org, click on the solid state lighting drop-down menu and click on surveillance testing. That's where these will be posted. Great question here about an appeal. It says, if appealing a result, can the manufacturer review the tested product to ensure it was built properly? For example, an incorrect lens was installed, thus the distribution did not meet expectations. One thing we clarified this time around, because this exact situation, maybe not with the lens, but claims of the product not being built properly, we clarified that when sending out a product for surveillance testing, it should be going through all of the exact same processes as if you were sending it out to a customer. And if those processes don't include already some sort of quality control check, then that's on you. We can't be here accepting, well, we sent out products, but they didn't meet our own standards and they got sent out anyways. If it was getting sent to the DLC when you were knowingly being selected for surveillance testing and it wasn't meeting your own quality standards, I'm not sure I'm not sure what hope there is for customers receiving it. But that's a great question. It's happened quite a few times already. Can we email the completed forms back? Yes, again, they can be sent to surveillance@designlights.org. It looks like we've got one more here. Last chance for anyone to get questions in to be answered for the group. Let's see. If I am not the OEM, so you're a private labeler and you're procuring the same product from the OEM, what do we do? I guess you and the OEM got lucky or unlucky, as you would have it. Both of you should be sending in products. Depends on, if you have it in stock and it happens to be the one that's branded in your name, great. But we actually do allow, not just in this scenario, but in general, the private label or OEM relationship, because we have documentation already submitted during the application process that states that two products are exactly the same in design and performance and pretty much only differ by branding. Then we do allow you, if you can't procure the product in any other way, to get the OEM's equivalent version. Usually, in my experience from this so far, is that OEMs are willing to provide that pretty quickly for you. That's all the questions I see right now. If you do have any others that we didn't get to, again, surveillance@designlights.org. I apologize for going a couple minutes over here, but I hope you all found this very helpful. We're really looking forward to getting through this round as smoothly as possible and as easily as possible for you and us both. If you ever have any suggestions after the fact, we do love to hear how the process could perhaps be made a bit smoother. So again, thanks for attending, and have a great rest of your day.